Good morning, everyone. Today we are looking at dispute resolution boards and using one of our projects as a case study. So our presentation will look at the outline of the presentation is as below. We'll look at what are DABs, how disputes arise, the types of DAB we have under the federal contracts, how they set it up, how to obtain a decision, and then the competencies, the attributes and obligations of a DAB member, the rules that will govern a DAB, amicable settlement, which the contracts provide for, and we'll look at some a snapshot of what we have under our project, the design and construction of the Tema-Aflao Road project, phase 1, tranche 1, service roads and interchanges. So dispute boards, I think they have been around for quite a while. I think they are nearing about 50 years in existence. It started off as a means of bringing in specialists within subject areas to oversee projects. So they were another layer added onto the layer of the engineer or the project manager, so that they would oversee the project, so that if disputes come in, they nip it in the bud, because there's been a lot of experience with disputes affecting projects and its implementation, affecting the execution, and then they drag on, and the cost of it, especially in the courts, and then also in arbitration, becoming very expensive. So you don't end up project, and then you end up with a lot of legal cost, out of the dispute. Also, we have adjudication boards are also, some of them are also known as dispute boards. It's a matter of terminology. And then you have a review board as well. Review boards are slightly different, as in they have a more liberal role they play in their function, but then they also issue decisions and when they are on the project. So the YDABs, they are set up to provide decisions on disputes. So when initially, before we had DABs in our contracts, the avenues for dispute resolutions were either the law courts or to go to arbitration. The law courts was not favorable to a lot of the foreign contractors we had. And this is not just in Ghana, other places. Because when foreigners come in and they have to deal with the local laws, they are not very comfortable. So then also it doesn't make your project attractive to attract foreign bidders, especially for international competitive bidding. And then we also found out that arbitration was also a very long process, a very expensive process. And sometimes the earlier project contracts provided for arbitration at the end of the contract or the execution. So people waited, piled up all their claims, and at the end of the project, you are in arbitration for only God knows how long, and then to settle the disputes. And then the arbitrators sometimes don't know anything about the project, and some of the facts are lost during the translation and everything. So they came up with setting up of a DAB, whereby they are part of the project or they come on board immediately the dispute occurs or within a short time frame. So the facts are fresh within people's minds. And then also, they're also there to, if you have another form, they are there to provide their opinions on disputes or things that will likely lead to disputes. So they serve as an early warning so that action is taken to prevent the dispute. And then also, in the interim, they provide a decision. Their decisions are either binding. So at least as a short-term measure, you have a decision to work with so that everybody can move on and then continue with the works. Whilst even if you disagree, then you can go on to the next steps that are allowed in the contract. So disputes in subclause 20.4, like if there's the contract allows that you would refer a dispute to a DAB. So what is a dispute? A disagreement with engineer's determination or a failure to uphold a decision or a determination. So the engineer gives a ruling or there's a ruling or an instruction or even a certification, and then it's not upheld. then it means that there's a disagreement with it. So that is a dispute. Because if you did not disagree with it, you probably would have paid or honored the instruction. So why do we have disputes? Some parties are at cross purposes on the interpretation of the contract provision. At the time we are signing the contract, we all have a fair idea of what we think we want. And then, so we go on and we start implementing the project. But then when it comes in and then we are trying to define the nitty-gritties of the contract provisions, we are like, oh, this is not what really we meant. But then, so we cannot agree on for the implementation of the project. And then sometimes too, there's a lack of confidence in the engineer's determination. A party feels that the engineer, especially sometimes the contractor feels the engineer, being an agent of the employer, is not acting fairly under the contract. So, or the engineer is delaying in the issuance of determinations and things like that. So this is an added body on that will sort of have, at least to review the engineer's determinations. So normally, we will go, the types of DAB we have under the FIDIC contracts. Now we have two main types, a full-term or a standing DAB. They come on board at the start of the project. So they run with the project. They are, they get progress reports. They have any issue that comes up, we give it to them. You have it's either a 1 member or 3 members, both types of DABs, an odd number, so that even if they do not agree, at least a majority decision will carry. So it's a 1 member or a 3 member during the period of the contract. And then the ad hoc is appointed when there is a dispute. So if a party feels there's a dispute, then they will write to the other party and tell the party, we have a dispute here on this particular matter, so I wish to refer it to the DAB. And then the contract has a way of setting up the DAB under 20.2. So if it's a 3 member, we will both nominate 1 member, and then either the 2 members will nominate 1, or with confirmation from the parties, or the parties with consultation with the members will nominate a 3rd person who becomes the chairman of the DAB. So we have here how it is done. So the 3 member, or if it's 1 member, then that you are okay. For the ad hoc, one thing I wanted to say on the ad hoc is that it can be selected for a particular discipline. So let's say you're on a project and you're having issues with interpretation of the contract, or the issue is very technical, it's a materials issue or something, or a piling issue, then you can have a DAB member, maybe 1 or 3 members who have speciality in that particular field. And then they would then review what the facts are and then make a determination, make a decision on it. So the parties sign, the parties, meaning the employer and the contractor, and the DAB member will sign what we call a tripartite agreement. So it's called a dispute adjudication agreement, which is a DAA, a tripartite agreement. So if it's a 3 member, each member will sign a contract with the employer and the contractor. So you will have 3 contracts with each of the members. If it's 1 member, then 1 person with each of the members. And then for the full term, because they have a retainer that is paid them on a monthly basis. And then you also have hourly rates that are paid if they make site visits, or if they sit on a referral. So if they have to make a decision, then they will bill the parties hourly rates that are spent in coming up with the decision. So the conditions of contract for the members is annexed to the conditions of contract for whether the yellow book or the red book. And then there's also procedural rules, which are also part of the contract, which is part of the tripartite agreement, which guides the process of adjudication. So sometimes, which tends to happen a lot around here, we fail to set up a DAB. The FIDIC forms, we both know the yellow and the red book. The red book provides for a standing DAB by default. The yellow book is an ad hoc, the 99 versions. But in the 2017 edition and 2022, all the books have a standing DAB, a full-term DAB. Yes, and then it's called the Dispute Avoidance Adjudication Board under the 2017. So if the parties fail to nominate, the failure occurs when the parties both fail to agree on appointment of the sole member, or either party fails to nominate a member for a 3-member. So each party has to nominate. The employer nominates, the contractor fails to nominate, then there's a failure. The parties fail to agree on the appointment of the third party. And then it also provides for a replacement. Maybe one member resigns or withdraws or unfortunately dies. There's a need to replace the person. So we cannot agree on the replacement. So a body normally in the drafting of the contract is provided for in the appendix to tender under 20.3. Then in the event any of these occurs, then the parties would inform this body and tell the body that, look, we need a member, we need you to nominate someone. So the party does that, the institution does it upon request from either party or both, and is made with consultation with both parties. Because the DAB comes in to sit on top of the whole contract administration thing, it's necessary that the agreement of the parties is necessary for the setting them up. Because when they are nominated and they act, they don't act on their, they act as an independent body, not for the members that nominated them. But we all have to have confidence in them for them to work well. So when a dispute arises between the parties, either party may refer the dispute in writing to the DAB for its decision, with a copy to the other party and the engineer. So the reference must be made under this subclause. So if it's a 3-member, when the chairman receives it, it's deemed as been received, and the DAB is mandated to give a decision within 84 days. There's nowhere you can get a decision made within 84 days if we're to go to the law courts or to arbitration. So that is one of the advantages of having a DAB. Sometimes the 84 days is small for them, or is short, it's short for them to issue a decision. So with the agreement, they will come back to the parties with agreement, and upon agreement, ask for additional days and so on, so that they can issue their decision. So when a decision is issued, if a party is dissatisfied with the decision, it has 28 days to issue a notice of dissatisfaction. The good thing about DABs is that the decision of the DAB is either final and binding or binding. Final and binding, if a notice of dissatisfaction is not issued within the timeline, then it's final and binding and everybody is bound by it. But then if a notice of dissatisfaction is issued, then it's binding. So everybody, all parties would give heed to the decision, but then you have a chance to appeal it in arbitration. So when you issue, also we'll come to the amicable settlement. So we're looking at the competencies of a DAB member. So sometimes, depending on the project and the scope of works, you would want, if you're looking for a 3-member DAB, you may decide that you want a person of particular capabilities or experience. If that is the way you want to go, you can put that as part of the conditions of the contract or in your search for a DAB member. But then one of the other competence they must have is they should be available, because you should be available for the project to commit your time for the visits and to review the documentation and things like that. The members should not have any conflict. conflict in the sense that it's not like you are working for one of the other parties or something like that. You should not have that kind of interaction with the parties that you are working for under DAB. Experience in the works to be carried out under the contract. Fluent in the language of the communication of the contract. So if the contract is in English and the DAB member you are looking at is French biased, his English is very poor, then he cannot be the member of the DAB. And then there are conditions, the general conditions of the dispute adjudication agreement provide for obligations of the DAB member. So the member must comply with these. And these are stated here. No financial interest, not previously employed. If you have any interest, you should disclose it in writing to both parties. And if the parties are okay with it, that is fine. So there must be disclosure. So you are not providing any consultancy services at that time. Comply with the procedural rules. DABs are not to give advice to individual parties. So any communication with the DAB members must be to both parties. So they cannot be seen to be having a discussion or a lunch or any form of that kind of interaction or giving individual advice. If an advice is sought, a copy must be sent to the other party. And then when they are also replying, everybody is copied in the advice that is given. Do not enter into discussions. They should be available. They should be conversant with the contract. So one of the key documents they are provided with at the start of if it's a full term, at the start of the project or at the start of, if any dispute in an artwork, is the contract document. They are to treat all the details as confidential. And here, be able to give advice is not in contradicting what is not to give advice. This advice is given to both parties. So when you are giving it, you give it in the presence of the both parties. It's not on a one-on-one basis. So key attributes of a DAB member: independence and impartiality. So a dependence arises from a relationship between the member and one of the parties or someone closely connected with the parties. So maybe sometimes the member may be a lawyer for one of the parties. So you already have you depend on the party. So that would more or less sort of influence what decisions you give us. So it's an objective test. And partiality arises when the decision maker favors one of the parties over the other. So, or when you have a prejudice over the subject matter in dispute. So it's also a subjective test. So subjective meaning that if I perceive it, I don't need to prove it, but once I perceive it, then it is that you are likely, depending on whatever has happened or whatever I may know, then I may use that against the inclusion of a member as a DB. So the procedural rules, I think this is rule number 9, gives the authority of the board, states that the authority of the board is given by the parties, that to do whatever they have to do. If they have to go into the contract and inquire for more information, they also have the authority to establish the procedure for deciding a dispute. So when the dispute occurs, they would come up with the procedural procedure as to how the dispute will be decided. Okay, so you submit your because the referral will have gone. So the answering party, you submit it within 7 or 10 days. The other party, you submit a reply within another set of days. And so would there be a hearing? This is how we'll conduct the hearing. Okay, our decision at the end of the hearing, our decision will be issued within this length of time, maybe another 10 days. So you give a program sort of as to how things will be done. And then you decide upon the board's jurisdiction as to what they can decide and what they can't. the scope of the dispute. Sometimes the dispute, you just send one issue there, but then it is the other underlying matters that may be attached to it. So they can look at all of these things that are part of it. Conduct a hearing if is needed. They can take the initiative to ascertain facts, matters required for the decision, even get outside experts if they, but all of these are with the approval of the parties. Make use of its own specialist knowledge, decide upon provisional reliefs, maybe interim measures and so on. Open up, review, revise certificate, decisions or determinations. So I was talking earlier on about the decision of the DAB and then issuing a notice of dissatisfaction. So when the notice of dissatisfaction is issued, there's a cool-off period of 56 days, say for people to ponder and so on. So when you ponder and realize that, okay, looking at the reasons for the decision, do I want to go on to arbitration or let matters die, or we can go into an amicable settlement, discuss the matter between the parties and see, okay, this is what the experts are saying on our issue. Every party will know where they fault and so on. And then they can agree that, okay, we will settle our dispute this way. Sometimes, depending on the matter, we cannot have an amicable settlement. So then we move on to arbitration. So a lot of issues more or less are settled by the decision period or amicable settlement. If the thing travels beyond here, then I'm sure that it means that it's warranted to go on to arbitration. So we come to our case study, the Tema-Aflao project. The design build project is a yellow book. And as I said earlier, the yellow book is an ad hoc DAB. But during negotiations, the parties, more or less, one of the parties was more impressed to have a full-term DAB in this contract. So we more or less imported the provisions in the red book, which is for full-term for the DAB provisions for this project. And then there was provided funding in the contract. Funding for DABs is provided under the contract. That's how they are funded. The employer pays half of the bills, the contractor pays half of the bills, but all the bills are paid by the contractor, and the contractor is reimbursed half of the cost. It's usually provided as a provisional sum, but you can agree that the markup on it can be waived, and in this case, the markup was waived on this particular project. So at the start of the project, we commenced, and then after commencement, we set up. So the contractor wrote setting up, submitted the profile of their nominee. The employer, Ministry of Roads and Highways, through GHA, also nominated one. We sought approval from MRH, sent the profile also to the contractor. They agreed. And then in this case, the two nominees sort of collaborated and ended up with the third person who became the chairperson. The profile was submitted and then it was approved. We also sent the draft of the contract agreement with the amounts for the retainer and hourly rates to them to review, for them to agree. So unfortunately, as we were trying to set the DAB up, it looked like a dispute was brewing. So immediately they signed the agreements and they were on board. The first referral was sent to them. And they even stated that they had hoped that they would have visited the project before the first referral was sent to them. So it was the issue on the first referral had to do with the commencement date. That was key amongst it. And this was because under the provisions on the contract, there were conditions precedent to the commencement date, which included that the possession of site had to be given and the full amount of advance payment had to be made. So, and the contractor felt that the possession of site, the site had not been cleared of all encumbrances. So they could not start work. And we were of the opinion that there were enough sections of the project road for work to start, as well as the fact that being a design build, the design could start as well, so that we could, by the time we were done with the design period, the contractor will have access to the site to start work as well. Also, we argued that the contractor felt that the possession of site was not given by the rightful person. Subclause 2.1 says that it's the employer who gives the access to site and possession. And this was given by the chief executive of GHA. And we argued that it was the GHA had capacity to issue the possession of site per the powers in Act 540, which is the act that governs GHA. So upon the receipt of the referral, the DAB established a procedure for conducting the adjudication, including the timelines. The respondent, being the employer, was required to respond to the referral within a particular period of time. The claimant then sent a reply, and then we also responded. We both agreed that we dispense with the hearing because we were of the opinion that documents submitted was enough for the DAB to make a decision. So there was no hearing in this particular case, and the DAB agreed. And then it took them a while. They could not issue their decision within the 84-day period, but then they asked for, I think, additional week or two, and the decision was issued. Unfortunately, we didn't have an unanimous decision, but we got a majority decision. And then the dissenting member gave a written decision as well in accordance with the procedural rules. So if you dissent, you have to issue a decision as well. So all of the requirements were provided for. The advantage in here was that at least it resolved for the time being the issue of the commencement date. The commencement date was established for the decision of the DAB. We were allowed to proceed with the works, and then works continued and proceeded. The contractor came back and started working on the site, which was good. They issued a notice of dissatisfaction, but have not proceeded with it further. So we assume that it is, we are good to go on that. And they are bound by the decision of the DAB and then complied with the provisions. At least, one of the advantages is that we have moved on, and then we managed to move the project on for works to start and all of those. We've had 3 visits so far by the DAB, and they issue reports at the end of it. They request for regular progress reports on the project to keep them abreast with whatever is happening. So we are awaiting their 4th visit, which is being scheduled, hopefully sometime next year, early next year. And then, so the advantages on the project that the DAB helps to keep relationships within the on the project, because at the time of the initial referral, things would have just unraveled and maybe would have, it was at the very beginning of the project. So imagine starting the project with the dispute that lingers on for the whole period of the project. It becomes difficult to manage and even execute it. We probably would have ended up with an arbitration had there not been the adjudication provision in the contract. And it also provides a means for us to air our views, our concerns, because if we engage them and let them know what each party's views are, at least they are aware, and that fits into whenever they are making a decision, because you cannot discount what you have been made privy to. The disadvantages is the cost. We have 2 members who are foreigners, so the cost of their air flights and so on. 1 member is Ghanaian who is resident in Ghana, so at least we don't have the cost of hotel and air flight fees and cost of travel expenses. And then sometimes too, you realize that each community has their nuances and so on. So you don't get the external parties having the nuances of how we do things around here. But at least they bring in also what they also know externally. And most of them have experience in other parts of the world, not just in one jurisdiction. So that helps in their performance of their performance as well. So in conclusion, last week I said that good human relationships are good for execution of projects. But then once there is money involved and you don't have a means of resolving disputes when they come up, it tends to be protracted. So the presence of an independent and impartial party with the technical know-how helps to address these effects of a protracted dispute on the project. So, this is what I have to say. And thank you very much for your attention.